Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women in and around Canadian politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder, and today joining me from the very beautiful city of Whitehorse, Melissa Murray, currently a counselor. But Melissa, you just announced last week that you're going to be doing something pretty exciting. So, first of all, welcome to the podcast, and I can't wait to hear about what you're doing.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you for having me on here.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. As soon as I saw the news, I was like, I would love to chat with you about it. So for anyone who follows you or knows you or who doesn't even, you're currently a counselor, but you announced last week that you plan on running for mayor.
I did. Yeah. I think I've been thinking about it for a year and a half.
Oh, really?
Yeah, about actually running. And it just like a lot of things had to align, like family, home, work, and being confident enough to like there's definitely been ups and downs, I'm sure any city councilor knows or mayor too, like this is my first term and it's only a 3-year term. So we're actually going into an election in October. Um, and just like understanding the system behind everything. It's not even, I mean, it's understanding how the city works and how we engage, but it's understanding how we can actually make change. And yeah, this last 3 years has been a big learning curve. And so, yeah, we're just kind of coming into crunch time and some councilors, our current mayor announced that she's not running again. There's a current counselor that has announced that he's running for mayor as well. That was, I think, early June. And some other counselors have announced that they aren't running. So it was kind of just like process of elimination. And I've had the question come up to me almost daily just by friends and family and the public. So it was kind of pushing me towards making a decision. And yeah,
Well, it's July, so November, you said November. So
October.
October.
Mhm.
Oh, like, yeah, that gives you a good runway into the actual election itself. But I want
Mhm.
to you go back for a second. So you've been on council now for almost 3 years, and like the process of understanding how like things actually happen. What like did you have an idea before running of how things actually worked, or just the idea of what you wanted to change? Because I think that there's a big kind of moment where people can run or even work in politics and think that it might be something that it's not, and then realize like, oh, this might not be as easy or as straightforward as I thought it was.
Oh, 100%. Like I kind of like it fell upon me, I guess, politics. Like I wasn't like my background is actually in like performing arts. I was a dancer before and I was in a completely different world other than politics. And it was kind of during COVID that I became more of an advocate, especially like my background is second generation Chinese Canadian. Um, and the anti-Asian hate was huge, obviously during COVID, and I wanted to do something. It inspired me to do something in our community. And then I actually had politicians reach out to me. I hadn't even never even thought about running for office or doing any of that until yeah, a current councilor reached out to me, and I had current territorial government politicians reach out to me too, and just like, oh, have you ever thought about it? And I was like, oh, no, not at all until you mentioned it. And the current counselor at the time that had reached out, he actually did a lot of like stats on like how many meetings they had, like how often they meet, how much they work basically. Because we definitely like I looked into like the orientation package and there was like I think 10 to 15 hours a meeting every Monday here and there. And I was like, okay, that doesn't really give you a grasp on what the job is.
Yeah.
Um, so I assume it's a lot, and I'm definitely the kind of person that overachieves and does way more than I need to. And I really wanted to, I had a drive to do it, but also keeping in mind, like I work full time on top of doing council, quote unquote, part time. I have, a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, and like still being able to do life on top of that. I definitely didn't realize going into it how much was involved until you're in it. And I think that's the biggest part is I know a lot of people are saying, I having the experience of being a counselor to be a mayor, like you don't necessarily, it's not, a prerequisite to being a mayor or getting to the next level of being a politician. But to me, it was like actually knowing that I can do it, knowing that I can do the work on top of, working full time and having a life and having a career and having family and like putting all the things together. And like, as people know too, like as a public figure, I'm at all the events, I'm at all the flag raisings, I'm at all the community events and stuff like, and I want to be out there. And that's kind of like all the things that are wrapped together that I don't people think people realize how much work is involved. So that really showed like me to myself how resilient I was and how much my values were driving what I wanted to do. And yeah, so that was like a crazy roller coaster in the last 3 years. And so going into mayor, I feel like I'm prepared because of that. And I mean, obviously knowing operationally the systems, governance, bylaws, policies, and all that stuff too is just like more stuff under my belt that I can use moving forward as experience.
How have you thought about what kind of campaign you're going to run and what you're going to be running on?
Yeah, in my press release, I wrote it down so I didn't forget all my things. There's a lot of things I want to do. A huge part of why I ran in the beginning was the equity, diversity, inclusivity portion with my background, having, obviously a minority, being a different culture, and um, I think says a lot too. And my parents were immigrants and immigrated to Canada in 1974. They started their own business. I saw how hard they worked and what the barriers they had to go through. And obviously, and same just growing up here. Like I was born and raised in the Yukon, but I grew up different in how my parents raised me and um how I was treated. I'm a visual minority too, so being treated in school differently and not knowing, not understanding, especially here with a smaller population. Now it's growing with the Asian population, but um,
Can
really
I
excited.
ask
Yeah,
how did they land on moving to Whitehorse?
to Whitehorse. So my dad moved to Vancouver, which there's a huge Chinese population. He was kind of a rebel, left Hong Kong and was like, I'm just gonna go move to Canada. And basically that's how that happened. And he moved to Vancouver when he was 19. And then I think he got offered to go to the Yukon College, now Yukon University at the time, to go for free. And they were just trying to kind of get people up here back then. And he did like culinary schooling there and just loved it. And he actually wanted to leave Vancouver because he didn't like the segregation. He didn't want to be involved in all that. And so I think without knowing, he has more of a political voice than he thinks he does. And yeah, so
Mhm.
he came up here and then started a family. And my whole family, extended family, is still in Hong Kong. But yeah, my mom, my dad, my brother, and I are here, and both my brother and I have started a family here too. So we've loved it ever since.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love finding out like how people ended up somewhere because the first city you move to as an immigrant is not maybe always where you end up like making a home
Mhm.
permanently. And so that journey is like can be really interesting and really, personal in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. And I think yeah, like I love it. Like I said, I was born and raised here. I went to school in Toronto, um, just because of dance. Like there's only a few places you can go to study
Right.
dance. And then I always knew I wanted to come home
Mm.
here too, just like kind of the small town vibes and having my kids grow up here. Like I love growing up here and just having, nature in our backyard and but still being able to go to, Vancouver and go shopping for a day and come home.
Yeah, it's you live in a part of the country where I mean I haven't visited. I would love to. Um, but you live in a really special place, I think,
Mhm.
in the context of Canada. So that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty beautiful. I would suggest everyone come visit. You give us
Yes,
some
of course.
let me know. Reach out. I'm here.
Yes. Well, it was funny. Actually, there was a someone in Madam Premier the other day, and we were chatting, and she was like, "Oh, I'm visiting from Swift Current in Saskatchewan," and I was like, "Actually, I know someone that lives in Swift Current, and I would like to go and visit." And I was like, I think the chances, because there's like she said about 15,000 people that live in Swift Current, I was like, I think the chances of us actually crossing paths are probably pretty high.
100%. Like even here, like our population is 38,000 in the Whitehorse. That's our capital city, and I think it's 45,000-ish in the whole territory. The majority live in Whitehorse, but same. Like you come into town, there's only so many places to go. Like you'll walk the streets and run into everybody you know.
I love that. But sorry, I got distracted by your parents like coming to
My
Canada
origin
story.
story.
Yeah, I love those stories so much. But back to why you're running. So what are the planks kind of your whys of your mayoral campaign?
Like I said, yeah, the equity portion is huge, and I think that's so big that is under everything. We talked about accessibility within, snow removal policy, and that's a huge item too. Like within each part of the city, I think there needs to be an equitable lens with everything we do, with governance, with creating our bylaws, with, development too, and going into like one of my priorities too is, affordable housing and how do we support that? Like us as a city we don't do most of the development, but we do the zoning, we do the land planning and the master planning and stuff like that. But how can we create those opportunities or vote on those opportunities if people are coming forward with they're building, affordable housing, they want to do a quadplex, they want to build higher, they want to, like we can kind of push towards that, and especially working with our two First Nations, Taong Council and Kwalendon First Nation, like they own a majority of the land in Whitehorse too. And if they're, creating land, like for example, a few months ago, they came forward with changing development on building housing for their elders. Like, I mean, that's a given. I'm like, why do we even have to vote on that? Like, they should just be able to have that. Like something like that, as simple as that, right? Um, Obviously combating climate change as much as we can, and then we just created a climate action plan, I believe, and working with pillars of starting with the city as a corporation, what can we do, with our infrastructure, underground infrastructure, our buildings, stuff like that, like our vehicles, where can we start internally, which is still huge. We have a staff of, I think, over 500. And if we're creating the permitting and the bylaws and everything for people to develop, how can we create those so that it is, environmentally sustainable, environmentally conscious, even within our road system or active transportation, stuff like that. Um, yeah, and I think just relationship building. There's tons. There's like infrastructure development that we're a growing city. I think we're the fastest growing city in Canada for our territory and for Whitehorse. We need housing. It comes in. It's a circular thing where we need housing because we need more employment. We have the lowest employment rate too. And how are we going to get those, whether or not they're local or they're immigrants coming in or they're coming from out of town? Then they need housing, and if housing is expensive, then how do we make it more affordable? We need more housing, we need more infrastructure, and then it comes down to money too. Like, then how are we going to build the infrastructure? And I was in Calgary a month ago now for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities conference. And it comes down to funding too. And then it's going to work upwards, right? Like our territorial funding, if the territorial doesn't have it, then it's federal funding. And it's, for me too, it's building strong relationships with the other levels of government to make sure that they know what we need. Because it's always, and especially I think it's always different in the north, with our climate and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, I think that like you truly do live in a rural and remote part of Canada.
Mhm.
I mean, not like because we, even in Alberta, we'll say, rural is like, just go outside of Calgary and it's rural, but you truly are rural and remote. And not just issues of like accessibility in terms of the things that all municipalities deal with like you mentioned, like snow clearing, but like, getting in and out of the community, roads, airports. Like it's a whole other layer of of management and governance, I think, and like demands on funding that other municipalities will maybe say that they understand, but it's really not the same.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like even, I think for supplies, for like I
Yeah.
said, employment, like, and then cost of living is higher, and cost
Mhm.
of groceries is higher, and
Yeah.
I'm sure without a doubt, like NWT and Nunavut are even higher, right? Like they're more north than we are. There's just the other struggles too that I feel like federally they forget. We kind of get forgotten. And even just listening to FCM, and I know they're trying to advocate the territories and stuff like that, but for the most part, they're saying provinces, they're talking about the provinces, and I'm like, and the territories.
Yeah.
We're here too. Like it's a different beast up here. Um, just to understand the issues. And then obviously for our smaller communities too, for the Yukon in general, like we have communities that are, a couple hundred people, and the struggles they go through, and their priorities are different, and and how do we help them?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and it's not even that smaller communities, I don't think, have the same struggles as large communities. If anything, smaller communities, it's more acute, right? Because there are only so many people and so many people doing jobs, and everyone knows each other, and it's really different.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, and on climate change and that relationship with the federal government, I mean, what are the conversations like in terms of planning, even yourself, if there was a change of government, um, in working with the federal government, if it was a poly-up government, to make them understand and bring them alongside on those conversations around accessibility, climate change, on the lens of DEI. Like, have you given that any thought?
Um, I think in line with my values, like probably I've had, I don't remember who came to speak at FCM on his behalf, as he
I think it
wasn't.
was Scott Aitchison, the housing.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
they were, yeah. So they were specifically talking about housing, and to me, it was almost like a threat where he was saying, if communities don't deliver on housing, then they don't get the funding. And I forget who is currently the president of FCM before they reelected.
That is a question I will fail in the municipal skill testing
I
arena.
know. Anyway, he also came to the Yukon prior to that. Anyway, and he spoke up at least where, you know, all communities want to build housing. It's not that we don't want to. And we know it's a need. And I know it's the same across Canada too. And, for us, and I think some other communities too, when there's a health crisis, when there's, so many other issues that are going on, or we don't have the land. I think, like, the city of Whitehorse itself, we don't have a whole lot of land to just like sell off and like build housing, or it's not zoned properly, or we create the master plans. We have to work with the territorial government on like what does this neighborhood look like, and then it's owned by private owners or First Nations or commissioner land or territorial land. Like, it's not that we don't want to build housing. I think everybody wants to, because the faster you can build housing, the faster, and like
People are
smaller
housed,
units, or
right?
exactly, which is,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, that was kind of an eye opener, I think, for me. Just like, we need the money. There's other issues, like I was saying, the health crisis. There's emergency disasters. Like, we had some of our northern communities had fires recently and they had evacuation alert, not an order yet, but and in the past few years we've had multiple landslides. We've had, and when resources from the city are going towards those, like we have a pretty regular landslide that happens on one of our major arteries that costs, $75 million. Like, we have to do that. We also need housing. But if our resources are being pulled, we had a sewer line that was about to explode, and it was like this 75% of our major sewer line for the city, and it was cracked and about to explode, but federal government wouldn't fund it because it didn't actually explode. We're like, well, we're not going to let it happen. There's like no mitigation in advance of that. But we did get funding. I want to say we got 45 million for the landslide area, because we have to like make the road wider. Like, it's a huge project, but it's only 75% of the full funding. And so there's so many different issues that we need to always like look out for, especially things that are urgent. I mean, even housing, though, it's part of that. And how do we like kind of balance that? Anyway, so I think,
Well, do you think that, like, I mean, housing isn't actually a municipal issue, right? It doesn't actually belong.
no.
That's my pet peeve right now is, like, housing is not a municipal issue, and I can understand why councils across the country are trying to address it, because it's not being addressed by other levels of government.
Mhm.
That means, to your point, when you have things like, a pipe that's going to explode, right? Or a landslide, or in Calgary, a water main break, or all of these different things, and you have so many high needs competing priorities, right? And then other levels of government are like, yeah, it hasn't actually exploded yet. So, come see us when it does. Or, you need to make do with what you have. We're not going to give you any more money. Um, that puts you, councils and counselors and mayors across the country, in a really difficult position, because what I see is people of any community being like, why isn't this getting done?
Yeah.
And you're the most direct level of government, and they expect you to get it done. And it's like, with what?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Because even yeah, now I'm thinking about like there's something like I know the issues, especially being in my council seat, and like when issues come up that aren't like super emergent yet, like we hear about it first. Like we had, a well that was potentially we had to shut down a well because there was, giardia, and like we caught it before. Everyone's safe, everyone's good. There's no boil water advisory, but like, there's that, and we need to have a new water treatment plant that's like 60 million. There's like, yeah, we only get so much from our taxpayers, and we can only raise so much or only like sustain
Right.
so much before, that's our main revenue source. And then, we're applying for funding sometimes through territorial government, through, to get to federal, or we go direct to federal. And it's just like, a constant struggle of that. And I know all municipalities have that struggle. We have the baseline, we've got to make sure we have clean water. We got to make sure, our community's safe, and, garbage is taken away, our sewer, our underground infrastructure, all the basic human needs. Um, but then housing, yeah, housing is an issue because it's in our municipality. Like we have to do like an indirect workaround on like how we can help. We created like tax incentives. We created, other incentives on and making zoning easier, or we changed, the bylaw so that single family home lots can now have a quadplex. We're doing the things that we can, but you're right, and we're not ultimately the ones to be like, okay, we're gonna hire a construction company and build a bunch of
Exactly.
houses. Hmm.
I think that actually, I think a lot, I mean, if given the ability, I think a lot of municipalities would be like, that call would have been made yesterday, right?
Hmm.
To address those issues. And I mean, it's, maybe I spend too much time thinking about it, about like who's doing what. And, the federal government is, you know, I think to the chagrin of most provinces, if not only some, doing some things that kind of reach into provincial jurisdiction, right? Then you have provinces and territories who would probably like to have more control over some things that are federal, right? And then municipalities are, so important, but then you get the fallout from from the provincial and the federal, tit for tat
Hmm.
politics of everything. Um, and there's just no, like, the trickle down doesn't reach you, right, in terms of like funding and what you need in order to, if it's not
Yeah.
transit, it's housing or um,
Hmm.
climate change mitigation, or any of those things.
Yeah. It definitely becomes, I don't know, like maybe partially siloed, or like also like downloading of expectations of, because like if we look to like I don't even know if it's the core root, it wouldn't even be the core root of it, but for example, we are understaffed even within the city in our land development department on permitting.
Okay.
So, we're hugely backlogged on developers applying for permits, and then they can't develop because we don't have the permits that they have to be approved for, and then we have to do inspection, and then it becomes this whole thing.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, where we want to be able to push that forward. It's not that we don't want to, so that they can develop, because obviously that's going to help with either commercial or industry or industrial or residential, right? And but then it comes down to like, okay, we don't have the staff. Why don't we have the staff? We don't have the resources. We don't have the funding. We don't have the like the backbone to like how we can actually. So I think maybe that's why potentially like the city gets blamed for like stopping things or like red taping things, and it's not necessarily the issue. And then if we go back to like, yeah, the root of it of like, okay, we don't have staff. Where are we going to find those staff? We're going to do recruitment, and then we're going to spend more money on finding a recruiter. We're going to, you know, we're trying to hire local, or we can hire contractors or consultants, or we try and go out. But like, how do we fix those issues? I mean, I don't have the answer to that either. It's like, I think that's a bigger issue too, is the labor market is just, how do we train more people? How do we make it more inviting for people? Maybe we need to change the culture
Mhm.
um, of people working within a public government. Like me, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the solutions
Yeah,
are.
there are a lot of pieces there. Are these like when you talk to residents, like are these things that are top of mind for them too, or are they different?
Mm, yeah, I'd say they're the same mostly. And to me, that's where like the inclusive and equitable lens comes in, because if I go back that far to like the systemic portion of it, and I think as politicians, if we're the governing body of that, is like making sure, if we're when we're hiring staff, like they feel safe, they feel included, their voices are heard, they feel like they're bringing value to the organization, and I feel like they're going to do a better job. And that becomes of like, okay, so do we have people, diverse backgrounds? We're not redlining people because they don't have the education. If they don't have the education, especially if they are becoming, an inspector or something, I know there's niche training, then are we supporting that? And I think we are doing a lot of training within our staff. I know each department has training dollars to help with that, but like, are we incentivizing that? Are we pushing that to find out, who can be in these roles where maybe they don't see themselves in, and that is kind of like going to a full circle of why I'm in this role. I didn't see people like me. I don't have an MBA. I don't have a political science degree. I didn't think I could be in this role. Um, but I think like I want to learn. I want to continue learning, and I think it's the same in any other role, whether or not, you want to be, I don't know, in land development and any of those roles, like, or a director or a manager. It can be for everyone, and I want to make sure that everyone knows that they can be. So how can we support them in that?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Really important. Um, I mean, that's where like I think that's where the real change can come from, right? And then other people seeing it done, and then they think they can do it, and then, it builds and builds and builds and builds. I think the other threat right now is that a lot of people see, the good work that's being done and honestly want to undo it because they
Mhm.
don't, right? And so that's the other thing that's kind of like happening off to the side right now. Um, that doesn't mean the good work shouldn't continue.
Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely lots of strides we're making, and I think there's just more. Like, even among reconciliation, it's not just a word anymore. It's, what
Yeah.
can we do that's tangible? What can we do that's actually meaningful? And where, yeah, like, we're always growing, and what's the next thing that we can continue doing? Um,
Mhm.
yeah. And I mean, that's going back to how I was saying about just relationship building, not just with our community, but with the different levels of governments and different governments. Like, what can we do to like communicate more? And it seems so simple, but it's not. Like, what are our issues and how can they be fixed?
Honestly, I think communication is at the root of so many things. Um, it's so fundamentally important. And I mean, not just personally, but I
On
say
all
this,
levels of life.
yes, in everything, family, friends, partners, government, like every aspect of it. And I can see I've been joined by a special person. Hi, Ben,
Special guest.
a special guest. The glamours and the realities of being a working parent
Hmm.
home right now. Um, Hi, Ben. Can you give me a few more minutes, please? You don't want to? Well, I would really appreciate it.
He's honest.
He's honest. Only if you're down here. Well, okay. Well, maybe this is just a sign that he's giving us our playing out music, which
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's the Emmys.
Well, I really want to thank you for spending some time with me, and I'm really excited to see what happens throughout your campaign and obviously the election and the territories. And Nunavut definitely don't get the attention that they deserve in terms of municipal and territorial elections.
Mhm.
Polling as well. Like we just that doesn't, if it even happens, if it's not done privately, but no one's dipping in, I don't think, to do polling frequently up there.
Mhm.
So I think it's a reminder to myself and to everyone listening that we need to pay attention to what's happening in rural and remote northern parts of Canada. Because you're actually, I think, for the most, like, you're on the front lines of what's happening with climate change.
Mhm.
Um, like we don't see it, but the fires and the landslides and everything that you're dealing with is um very real and out of sight, out of mind, and we need to pay more. Do need to give it more mind.
Mhm.
Oh, hello. Make what? Okay. Well, I'm being summoned to make some cinnamon buns.
Oh, that sounds
Yes.
delicious.
Yes. We'll have to see actually. They might actually be expired. That's oh yeah. It expired in March. That's a real life mom fail in current time.
That's true.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And I know that there are a lot of people I think that you connected with probably before FCM. They're also watching you now.
Mhm.
And we're all excited to see what happens.
Yay. Yay.
Okay.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. Bye.